everyone, and welcome to part 3 of the Poriscope tutorial series, Putting It All Together. In this section, we're going to walk you through some advanced features and best practices to help you make the most out of your Poriscope experience. If you follow along part 1 and part 2, then now you're more than familiar with Poriscope's interface and with the analysis pipeline. In part 3, we're going to help you optimize this pipeline for real-world analysis. But before we get to it, we're going to take a quick review at the workflow, starting with how the data flows from one step to the other. So, as we saw in part 2, Poriscope's workflow is divided in 3 main steps, followed by an optional 4th one. We have raw data, event analysis, metadata, and finally clustering. So, for instance, let's load a session with everything we did in part 2. Load session, then we select the JSON file, tutorial, and we can confirm that's what we did. Raw data, we have our raw signal here, the event finder, then we loaded those events, we fit them, then we had the option to create subsets with that data, to plot that, and then finally we cluster that data. This is a good time to remind you that when you load a session, you are not actually loading the actions. So this session hasn't run the event finder, this session hasn't run the event feeder or written the events found. That's why you can see here in the login panel, you won't see found events or wrote events. You are only seeing the milestones. Remember, we talk about milestones, which relate to plugins that we add, that we load. So that's why you see camera reader and then the channels, that's our raw data. Then you see the events, the 34 events we have in our file, and then finally the 18 events fitted that we have. The only milestone that you don't see here is the filter, because sometimes you may not have a filter, which is why it doesn't get logged. But other than that, you always see the files you have and the things you write. But when you're loading sessions, it's just the main aspects of those milestones, and you can check them here. Another important thing is you can see that the fitted events database is only there once, because both metadata and the clustering tab use the same one. So you don't have to load it for them once here and then once in clustering. If you do it once in any of those tabs, it will appear in the other. So that is really practical. So that is the core workflow. If it's the first time you're using Poriscope, then you definitely have to go through this workflow: raw data, event analysis, metadata, and clustering. However, if it was not the first time you're using Poriscope, so let's say I have already used Poriscope before, I already have my fitted events, now I just want to create subsets based on them. I'm just going to go to metadata, and then I'm just going to load my fitted events. Load here, and then I'm gonna plot them as however I prefer. Create subset, save, then I'm done for the day. Or I could also wanna go directly to clustering. And then same thing, because I already did it in metadata, it's already here. Cluster, commit that, I'm good. So while Poriscope is linear by design, as you move forward in the pipeline, it becomes more flexible. And it lets you go back and forth to, for instance, I'm here. This is something we were talking earlier in part 2. If you remember, I committed my clusters to this database. So it added 2 columns to it, one of them being cluster labels. So I could say, okay, I actually want to do subsets with those clusters that I have now. I want to deepen my analysis for that database. So I would go back to metadata, and then I would say, okay, well, first of all, now you can see this column that was not there before, cluster label. Again, it's only in events because we didn't cluster anything in the sub-level table. So cluster label, and then we have 0, 1, 2, 3, those 0, 1 to 4 as our labels, because remember we merge the cluster label 1 with the 3 under label 1, so we don't have cluster label 3 anymore. And then we can add a filter. So cluster label, let's say bigger than 0. And then 30, so now it's 1 to 4 because we said bigger than 0. But bottom line, as you go farther in your analysis, you're able to go back and forth between tabs. So the first time it's linear, but once you have completed the analysis pipeline once, you get a lot of flexibility and you can go back to any tab, tweak your parameters, make changes, change the filters, whatever helps you get as many insights as you can from your experiment. Before we move on, there is something I want to touch base on, and to do that, I have loaded the part 2 session, so you can double check here. It's everything we did. And it is the fact that, as you're aware, objects in Poriscope are extremely interdependent. What do I mean by this? As you're aware, if you add an event finder, it's going to ask you which reader do you want this event finder to be locked to, and so on with writers. And so far, we have seen the add option. We have also seen the edit option. The only option that we're missing is the delete one. So let's try that. Let's delete our event finder. We get a message saying unable to delete since it has dependence. And then it tells you which one is a dependent. And this makes complete sense because when you create a writer, it makes you select which finder it's locked to. So because you're not, and even if you select the wrong finder and you want to write, you won't be able to. So it makes complete sense that it doesn't let you delete the finder that your writer depends on. So the same applies for the reader and for the other tabs. If at some point you're not happy with some of the instances you have created, what you're going to do is that you're going to go backwards. So you're going to go, you did reader, finder, writer. If you want to delete them, you're going to have to go writer, finder, reader. So I'm here, I have writer. I'm going to do delete writer. That works. Delete finder now works because nothing depends on it. And then finally, delete reader works. And then you can start again. So I wanted to point that out. Now that we have reviewed once again Poriscope's core analysis pipeline, as well as understand how flexible it becomes once you have conducted the analysis at least once, how you can go back and forth, tweak your parameters, and basically just do as much as you can to extract as much information as possible, we'll now move on to how you can extend your analysis workflow and even customize it.